Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something that is literally a game changer for some of the most vulnerable kids out there, youth affected by conflict and crisis. We're going to unpack a brilliant new methodology that completely reimagines how we handle trauma response. Instead of relying on reactive clinical settings, this approach brings support directly into the classroom. It's a fascinating look at how structured educational frameworks can actually change lives. So, let's just jump right into it.
But to really get why this solution is so incredible, we've got to look at the stakes first. Picture a school in a conflict zone. The adolescents there are carrying a massive psychological burden. But here's the critical gap the sources point out. Schools in these areas severely lack structured, non-stigmatizing tools for early trauma response. When we just rely on traditional psychiatric clinics, we're introducing a huge barrier of stigma. I mean, a lot of affected youths just won't seek help if they feel like they're going to be labeled, right? They urgently need proactive mental health support that meets them exactly where they are, in school. And honestly, this isn't just an isolated issue. Figuring this out gives us a blueprint for handling adolescent trauma on a global scale.
So, here's our roadmap for today. We'll cover the Youth Trauma Challenge, the UNIMAP Innovators, the CBT Innovation Methodology, core trauma domains, and practical EdTech applications.
Let's start with Section 1, the Youth Trauma Challenge. Look, if we don't step in early, communities dealing with conflict face this compounding downward spiral of long-term trauma risks. When trauma is just left unaddressed, a student's academic engagement destabilizes and their psychological resilience completely plummets. To stop that downward trend, creating a scalable, preventative framework, one that bridges clinical psychotherapy directly with school-based education, is absolutely vital.
Moving on to Section 2, the UNIMAP Innovators.
This whole breakthrough is thanks to an incredibly dedicated research team over at UNIMAP. That's University Malaysia Perli. The innovators behind this methodology are Mohad Arsa Johannes, Amirul Ridwan Abu Bakar, Faki Ahmad Shuhaili, Siti Norayu Mahad Basir, Ahmad Fahmi Mahamud, Tengku Kastria Fudin Shad Tengku Yakob, and Siti Balkis Muhammad Ibrahim. What's super cool here is how they mashed up expertise from business, communication, and even chemical engineering and tech to perfectly bridge clinical science with everyday education.
Section 3, CBT Innovation Methodology.
So how did they actually do it? Well, the team built this really meticulous 6-step workflow. Step 1 started on the ground, getting direct input from 6 conflict-affected teens in Lahad Datu. Step 2 involved rigorous screening using the TSI2A tool. This rolled right into Step 3, qualitative data collection, and then Step 4, structured cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT counseling sessions. From there, in Step 5, they funneled and coded all those raw data points. And finally, Step 6 used thematic analysis to generate overarching actionable trauma themes.
It all flows a bit like a giant funnel, and this funnel is totally crucial. It illustrates exactly how raw, qualitative clinical data is systematically sorted and distilled down into clear, actionable themes. They didn't just guess what these students needed. They used hard clinical data to define the exact types of trauma these kids were actually dealing with.
Which brings us to Section 4, core trauma domains.
Coming right out of that data funnel, the team pinpointed 3 distinct trauma domains impacting these vulnerable youths. Domain 1 is developmental and maturational, so your standard growing pains, personal identity, and milestones. Domain 2 is all about unexpected situations. This is the acute stuff, the conflict shock, displacement, and profound loss tied directly to their crisis environment. And Domain 3 is social and coincidence, things like peer stigma and interpersonal strain. Breaking it down like this is a huge deal because educators can actually untangle the acute trauma of a conflict shock from just normal, everyday teenage struggles.
To actually tackle these domains, the core of their innovation leans on 3 therapeutic pillars: cognitive restructuring, emotional regulation, and adaptive coping. I know, that sounds a bit academic, right? But what it really means in a classroom is giving kids the mental tools to catch those negative, intrusive thoughts tied to trauma and literally reframe them. Instead of being overwhelmed, they learn to regulate their emotions and adopt healthy coping mechanisms.
All right, Section 5, practical EdTech applications.
This is where it gets really inspiring. Embedding these CBT principles straight into school programs is the secret to making this a sustainable and completely non-stigmatizing preventative tool. The team took their core clinical insights and translated them into 4 practical school applications. Let's walk through them one by one.
First up is school counseling and guidance. Instead of pulling a student out, sending them away to a psychiatric facility, which, let's face it, feels really isolating,
This framework integrates structured CBT protocols directly into individual and group counseling right inside the school. It makes targeted trauma support easily accessible and just a normal part of the student support system. Application 2 focuses on teacher professional development. We all know teachers are quite literally on the front lines here. This innovation equips them with trauma-informed teaching strategies so they can easily spot subtle cognitive distortions in a student's daily behavior and offer early support right there in the classroom before things escalate into a crisis.
Then we have the third application, student emotional literacy. This one's all about daily prevention. They aren't just saving cognitive restructuring exercises for the counselor's office, they are seamlessly weaving them into the standard curriculum. Through engaging modules, students build emotional regulation skills every single day, making adaptive coping a totally normal part of their education.
Now, think about the traditional route for a second. It's clinical, it's reactive, and for a teenager trying to fit in, it can be highly stigmatizing. But the UNIMAP team's fourth application flips the script entirely by bringing in digital and edtech integration. This makes support continuous, self-guided, highly immersive, and most importantly, non-stigmatizing, because it uses technology the students actually want to engage with.
Seriously, this is where it gets incredible. The framework uses AI-powered CBT chatbots to give kids continuous, self-guided support whenever they need it. And if that isn't wild enough, they actually integrated a VR CBT simulator into a crisis zone school setting. We're talking immersive resilience and stress management training, perfectly grounding all those abstract clinical terms into interactive, everyday classroom realities. It's just a groundbreaking way to engage crisis-affected youth on their own terms.
So what does this all mean? It means we aren't stuck with the limitations of the old, stigmatizing clinic model anymore. By identifying specific trauma domains and turning them into real-world school programs, this methodology equips vulnerable youth with lifelong cognitive coping mechanisms. With AI and VR successfully bridging that gap between clinical therapy and the classroom, we really have to ask, how will this scalable early intervention fundamentally reshape the future resilience of our crisis-affected communities worldwide? It's a massive question, but thanks to this incredible research, it's one we're finally ready to answer.